Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. It's Thursday morning, so hopefully everybody had enough time to get their questions in. So let's jump in and see what we got. First up, Tony Shadrick wants to know, what is the thinnest, floppiest cable I'm aware of? Look, man, Voltar just had a heart attack. There's no reason to come down. Okay, I'm sorry, I had to. I'm a child. I can't help it. Tony had an actual question. What's the thinnest, floppiest HDMI cable that you're aware of? Looking for something that doesn't have to have great longevity, but handle the resolutions that Mr. puts out, making a super small portable rig. So if you don't need things in very long distances, you can get ribbon cable styled HDMI extenders for use internally in side builds like that. And I think that would probably be your best bet. But with stuff like this, you need to really test it. So you're going to have to budget for buying a couple. Maybe you'll get lucky and just find one that works on the first try. But I think you should really expect to assemble this stuff and say, all right, well, now I'm getting weird interference. Let me try a different cable. And I would also check out Ken from what Ken's Making's video on his portable Mr. idea. So, maybe there's some stuff there that you would be able to use. But I think as long as you're not going a long distance, this is going to be something that's very doable. I think you're just going to have to try a bunch of different ones. And here's where AliExpress could actually be a help, because if you want to buy 3 or 4 right away and they're $2 each or something, it could save you some money. But I would just look for any kind of internal ribbon cable based solution first. But if there's anybody out there that is already building portableized stuff, I know there's a whole community of people who make portableized consoles and stuff like that. So anybody who already knows, please just write the description. Once again, YouTube deletes links. So instead of putting in an AliExpress link, just do a description of what it is and say find it on Amazon, eBay, AliExpress, whatever, and just don't put the .com or anything. But that's a good question. I've definitely used them before, but it was years ago, so I wouldn't even be comfortable finding the link, because who knows if it's even there or if you're going to get the same quality stuff. But you should be able to do this. So anybody has anything to point us in the right direction, please let us know. Last week, Dustin Madison had a question about audio and cables and how to clean connectors, and I went off on a whole rant about it because it's something that, you struck a chord with both retro gaming and live performance stuff. And now Dustin just wanted to know if I had any links for some of the stuff I'd recommend for those situations. And unfortunately, I think that's the type of stuff that you have to make your own bag of tricks as time goes on, because I don't remember, other than like Deoxit, I don't think there was ever one thing I bought that I was like, oh yeah, this is perfect. It was usually stuff I found, or I'd be walking through a store after a nightmare scenario, and then I'd see a brush and go, oh, that would have been perfect for last week or whatever. So I think you have to just kind of assemble your own emergency toolkit for stuff like this. Deoxit is always an easy one, but different types of brushes, small, not tweezers, but really small needle nose pliers, and you get a couple of different sizes of those, because you always want to start out with the biggest and move your way down, because the smaller ones, I've broken the heads off of many needle nose pliers trying to get it to bend something that it was probably too small. So I've always had, like, my guitar rig kit had pliers, screwdrivers, like 3 different types of pliers, screwdrivers, those little spinny things, so if you needed to change a string quickly, you could spin the things around faster. It was basically just a random toolkit of stuff that I had found over the years. Certain screwdrivers that fit perfectly into the screws that were in the guitars that I used, to the point that when I stopped playing live, I threw all that stuff in a box, and then years later, I was like, what's this box? And I opened it up, and I was really impressed with myself. Like, wow, this is like the exact set of tools one would need to play my rig live. It's almost like somebody built it for my rig. So yeah, it's one of those things that you got to just kind of do yourself, and just remember that you built it. And don't be a dum-dum like me and realize years later, well, how come it's so much harder to change my strings now? And it's because all the tools I used were packed away in my live equipment box. But yeah, I think that's just one of those things you got to work on. And if anybody has any tips for stuff like that, feel free to post in the comments. But this is really like a do-it-yourselfer type of thing. Next up, Tony Escobar is interested in learning how to solder. They asked Tito on his new channel for any recommendations for starter kits, and he recommended Amazon. Do I have any recommendations and affiliate links for starter kits? Thank you, Tony. It's always really nice when people ask that. The tools page on RetroRGB is still something I stand by, it could very well be that there's some slightly outdated stuff there. So just do a quick little bit of research. A perfect example is in the last question. I'm going to leave a link for a new video that Project Farm just came out with about duster or portable dusters. So maybe the one that I linked to on Amazon isn't quite the best anymore. It's still great, but maybe one of the newer ones is better. Stuff like that. But the overall recommendations still stand. Don't buy a crappy soldering iron. Get something that's decent. And that doesn't necessarily mean more money. I learned that lesson the hard way. I think the soldering station that I bought that I've been using now for years was like $10 cheaper than the other one that I owned that was terrible. So I don't know if I personally would recommend a starter kit so much as just going through and getting the different tools that you need individually. So I think Tito has affiliate links for those iFixit kits that he uses that seem like a really great starter kit for screwdrivers and stuff like that. But then I would go and probably buy the same Kesker soldering iron and the different tips and stuff that I've been recommending that I've just been using for years. And so is Voltar. I think he still uses the same cheap station. So that's definitely where I would start. Is just check out that page, scroll through, and just get a toolkit. Tito's link's probably going to be the best one for that. Although I do have ones on my page too for the kits that I use, but Tito's a little more up on that stuff. And then the Kesker soldering iron, and then just the very basics. And same thing like I was mentioning before, a couple of different needle nose pliers and tweezers if they don't come with the iFixit kit, stuff like that. But you, without a doubt, do not need to break the bank. I think if you don't need a desoldering iron, you could probably go $200 and get everything you need that could get you started. And if you decide that modding isn't for you, you still are going to have tools that you're probably going to use at another point in your life. I cannot tell you how many times somebody's come over and be like, oh, this thing doesn't work anymore. Oh, this light's blinking. And I just pop it open and one wire needs to be soldered back onto a battery terminal or something. So, I wouldn't go crazy, but I would spend a little bit of money and just take, mentally think of it as you're adding tools to your toolbox and not so much that you're investing in your modding solution. Because if you don't end up doing it yourself, you're still going to use the basic stuff. So hopefully that points you in the right direction. Next up, Josh Lopez got their family's old MiniDVD camcorder, and they're looking to take those videos off and put them on one of those video smart frames for their parents. And there's a couple of things that you're definitely going to want to check before doing this. First, just throw one of those DVDs into a PC DVD drive. If you don't have one, just get the cheapest USB one you could find on Amazon or eBay or AliExpress or whatever, and then put that in and see what's on the disc. If it's a video TS folder like standard DVDs, it's almost definitely going to be a 480i file. But if you see MP4 files or if they're saved as TS files like Blu-rays, it could be 480p. But it's more likely that if you are getting 480p output from the video camera's component video out, that it's just deinterlacing as it's outputting. So I would check what's on the disc first and go from there. And then honestly, from that point, you could just kind of go into that scale home videos video that I did and just take everything that's in there and apply it to this. Now, you mentioned it doesn't need to be upscaled because the video frame is only at 480p. However, if these turn out to be 480i files, which shows you how to verify it in that video, then you absolutely do want to use Bravicon to just deinterlace to 480p. And that way you could get it. You could get a much better progressive scan file from it that runs at the proper frame rate. So that would definitely be something you want to do. The how to rip a DVD part, that was only a quick snippet in that video, but the software that I linked to is completely free, and the paid version has a bunch of options, but the free version just lets you rip the disc as one file. But in a scenario like this, you would be cutting up the clips that you wanted anyway, which I teach you how to do in that video. So it doesn't really matter. Just dump a DVD to a file. It's not going to add any compression whatsoever, and then chop it up in Virtual Dub, take the clips that you want. And if they are actually 480p, cool. You could just, cut up the clips that you want with Virtual Dub and use either direct stream copy or whatever else. I show it all in the video. But if not, definitely deinterlace using Bravicon first and kind of just go from there. So I'll leave a link to the video, and I'll also just leave a link directly to that DVD ripping software just in case. But let me know how this goes, because I'd be interested to see if there were, I know there are use case scenarios that I didn't cover in this video. I just don't know how common they are and if this could be something that if you could run into a problem with this. So please keep us updated, but I know the video is really long and really boring, but it actually does answer pretty much all the questions that you're going to need for this. Next up, Gemini Man is interested in N64 RGB output, and they've been comparing a few different solutions. The RGB output for some solutions look darker or muddier than others, with Voltar's board seeming to look the best. Are they seeing things, or are all RGB output solutions the same quality? Well, I would have to ask, how are you comparing these? Because if you're just watching videos of people capturing N64s or seeing screenshots on sale pages or something, you could be seeing the difference between different capture solutions, which is why I'm so finicky about how I do captures. And I'm always clear about like, hey, this is a comparison shot, or I just grab some captures to show game footage, because you could very heavily skew the way these things look if you don't do the capture right. But if you're talking about, maybe you have a shielded RGB SCART cable going into a TINC 4K, and you have them all set to generic mode, so you're not worrying about any kind of, profile skewing the results, and you're seeing a difference, then yeah, there could be. I think there's been a lot of garbage over the years out there, and people get annoyed when I say that, but, I've been very vocal about certain sellers selling just terrible products. There was one, I mean, it was a decade ago now, but there was one that messaged me about something, and I said, "Oh, well, you actually used the wrong resistors on that. It's not going to hurt anything at all, but the image quality is definitely not going to be as good." And his reply, I thought his reply was going to be, "Ah, damn, now I got to manually change those resistors." His reply was, "Ah, okay, well, I'll just dump these off on eBay and make another batch." And that's really gross and really common. So that is absolutely a scenario in which you take somebody like Voltar or Bordy, who worked their butts off to make these really good boards with the proper circuits on it and the proper video levels. If you take one of those versus a garbage solution like that, yeah, you're absolutely going to see a difference. But there's more than just those two good solutions out there. Also, it could be a scenario of you had one of the later model N64s that you needed to install an advanced board in, and if you have flex cables or longer wire runs, there could definitely be differences there as well. So I guess you should probably re-ask the question. If you're just curious about N64 RGB output, because we're nerds, that's perfectly fine, then I could go through a little bit more detailed of an answer. But if you're just saying, hey, I have an N64 and I want good quality RGB output, just get the Voltar board or the Bordy board, or if anybody else knows of ones that are readily available, then that are high quality, let me know. I haven't been keeping up on a month-to-month basis, but there are lots of great people out there. The problem is very often it's hard to keep these things in stock. It's hard for installers to keep up with demand. So that's why those are usually my two go-tos, because we're talking about people that have been in the scene over a decade that have really delivered. But yeah, try looking at those. And if you don't have an N64 that's compatible with a basic board, look into the more advanced ones and see what you got there, and see what your options are. And if you're going digital anyway, you might at that point just want an HDMI board. So it's not as easy as, are they all the same quality? Because the short answer is no, definitely not. But if they're built right, they should be. Took me 3 minutes to tell you that. Sorry. One more question that's much easier from Gemini Man. Is there any visual difference between the GameCube Carby with no scaler versus the RetroGem? So once again, you need to clarify exactly what you're talking about. If you are just getting, like, say you have the basic edition of the RetroGem and you're just sending 480p to your RetroTink 4K and letting it do the scaling, there is zero difference. That would be a one-to-one digital to digital signal. They should both perform exactly the same, and I can't imagine there would be any differences. However, if you have the paid ransom edition of the RetroGem and you're scaling to 1080p, and the game that you want to play can't be forced into 480p mode, you're going to get motion adaptive deinterlacing built right into that, and it's going to be at a higher resolution. So if you're talking about sending it to a device that can handle 480p well, whether that's a TINC 4K or whether you just have a really nice TV that supports good quality 480p upscaling, then no difference at all. But if you're going into something like a PC monitor, which is generally terrible at much lower resolutions, then getting the RetroGem with the scaling would absolutely be a higher step up. But you also just have to consider total price. Do you already own something like a Tink 4K? Is that something that you plan on getting? You know, do you have to pay somebody to install the retro gem? So now you're buying the retro gem, which is more expensive than the Carby, and then you're paying the ransom to get the 1080p motion adaptive deinterlacing, and then you have to pay somebody to install it. You know, now you're really on the way to just, why don't you just get a scaler like the, you know, the Tink 4K CE and get the Carby, and now you have your RGB N64 taken care of and your GameCube and any of the other analog stuff that you have. So it's one of those things where none of this stuff is super easy. You have to really put it into context for yourself, but always take time and money into consideration, because sometimes you might look at something and go, that costs too much money, I'm not buying that. But you take a step back and you see everything, your total setup, and you go, oh, actually, it's about the same price as the other way, and it would work better for me. So, you know, there's absolutely a time and a place where the retro gem in a GameCube would be the perfect solution for people. But generally speaking, the Carby is going to be the better solution, only because of cost and ease of installation. You just plug it in. So yeah, that's definitely my thoughts on that. Next up, Danny Funker's friend recently got a Sony CVM-1900 that seems to be from about 1980. They have a few questions. First, they know I've talked about BVM and PVMs, but what are CVMs and where might this have been used in the past? So my answer to you is a complete and total guess, and if I get this way wrong, somebody please make fun of me in the comments for it. But my guess is that it probably stands for color video monitor, because if it was from 1980, that's still something that they would have talked about. But whenever you see more pro TVs like this, they would have been used in a scenario that it needed to be slightly better picture quality, but also more reliable than a consumer TV and guaranteed to have the right inputs. Because composite video was still kind of a big deal in 1980 for the average person. Anybody that's old enough to remember that stuff, I wasn't even born then, but I was born in 81, but whatever. So I think it just would have been a scenario like maybe security cameras to watch those. Could have been medical, could have been computer related, but something where you needed a step up from a basic consumer TV. All those are guesses though, so please make fun of me in the comments if I guessed wrong. Next, can we use this to play retro games? Absolutely. So I took a look at a picture of one of these, and the model number matches, so it should be the same as yours. But there are some RF inputs up in the corner. So if you have, you know, Atari 2600, ColecoVision, just connect right to those and set the channel. That'll be great. It also has some BNC connectors in the back that should allow you to route composite video through. Also audio, but I wouldn't bother with audio. I mean, it's, you know, over 40 years old. The speaker's probably dead. I would just go get yourself some shielded desktop speakers. I did a whole video on that. I'll leave a link to the video, but basically make sure they're magnetically shielded, get some cheap used ones, set them alongside of it, and you're probably going to have better sound than a very, very old speaker that's built into this. But the connections in back, you should just need very cheap BNC connectors on it. And there is one other, it looks like a VTR input that's meant for video recorders. That's essentially just another way to get composite video. It's possible this monitor does something different, but I don't think so. I think I wouldn't even mess with that, especially at first. Just make sure that it works for you. Spend the smallest amount of money on it. See how you like it, and then kind of look into it. But I'm pretty sure that's just a different connector for another composite video and audio input. So just stick with the BNCs. Next, is it possible to use RGB modded consoles on this monitor? No, you would have to try to find a way to RGB mod it, which would be, I think, for something like this, way more trouble than it would be worth. I would personally just embrace this for RF and composite and see how it looks, but you're probably going to find that a lot of older consoles look excellent on it. And lastly, what does the 75 ohm switch do? So it should be, now I haven't never used this one exact monitor, but it should be that if you have multiple things connected, so like let's say you want to use this to game, but you also want to grab a RetroTink to stream at the same time, turn the 75 ohm switch off, feed composite video into this, and then use the composite video out to go into your RetroTink and go from there. But in most cases, if you're just connecting a single video signal to this and not using the output side, you would flip the 75 ohm termination on, and that would end up completing the circuit and making it the proper brightness. So for testing, only connect an input and leave it on and go from there. Because I've definitely seen PVMs where the outputs were weird and it affected the picture quality as well. So just try the input for now and then kind of go from there. So look, this is not a hidden gem RGB monitor, but honestly, it looks really cool. I'm looking at pictures of it now. You know, it's got the channel buttons programmed on the bottom, so that's really neat, switching between different consoles. You know, it's got your knobs right on the front, and you could definitely try audio in it as well. Maybe you want that vintage, like Atari 2600 through a crappy speakers, probably how you should use it. So yeah, I think it's a good find. I think you should be happy that you got it. I would not consider it for RGB at all. I think it's just a composite video and RF monitor, but start by buying the cheapest BNC connectors you could find and try to find some shielded speakers if you want to kind of up the game on this a little bit. But still an awesome monitor. It's just not for RGB. Next up, Charles Madeir has a Japanese GameCube that they're using with a modded Japanese D-terminal cable. For anybody that's unaware of what that is, it's essentially component video with a different connector on the end that was popular in Japan. Anybody with a FrameMeister probably remembers that. And you could have modded those GameCube cables, either the component ones or the D-terminal ones, for other things. The D-terminal ones, you actually could have just gotten an adapter to make it component video. However, you could have also modified the chip on the console side of things to get RGBS, or I think RGBS, but definitely RGB VGA, essentially. And that appears to be what Charles has, is the GameCube cable that was modded to output VGA, let's just call it, instead of component video. Charles is using this signal with an Ikegami monitor that's capable of 480p. Awesome monitor, by the way. And the GameCube's RGB HV, excuse me, RGB HV signal goes through the Extron RGB 203, which is a sync converter, which also does many other things. Very cool piece of equipment to own. And it all seems to work fine, but there's a rather heavy bowing on the top and bottom of the picture. I call it sync curl, if it's what I think it is, which is definitely not the right name, but it's how I've been referring to it forever. Charles also said that they have other consoles like a PS3 that they use in widescreen 720p and many other 240p consoles that all seem fine. So here's what I would do. Sorry, still getting rid of that cough. First and foremost, definitely don't mess with any settings on the monitor because of this yet. You're going to want to determine what the problem actually is. And I personally would start by taking the PlayStation 3, setting it to 480p 4:3 mode, and seeing what happens. Do you still get some kind of weird sync curl issue? And if that's the case, then yes, then you would want to go in and kind of carefully mess with some of the settings and see if it's just related to a 480p signal being sent. But it's most likely related to the way the sync is being converted, because Ikegamis and Sony BVMs are very, very sensitive to that. I imagine if you had a Master System or a TurboGrafx 16 PC Engine, you would probably get similar results as well. So I would start by just trying any other 480p solution, and if it works, like let's say you put your PS3 to 480p, try both widescreen and 4:3 just to see, and there's no problem at all. What I would then do next is try to borrow at least any other GameCube solution. Do you know anybody with GameCube component cables, whether it's the ones that you could buy now or the originals? Any other solution like that, would that solve your problem? If so, you could probably sell the D-terminal, modded D-terminal cables. If not, if you can't get a hold of those, do you know anybody with a Carby? And then you could just pick up an HDMI to component video or VGA converter, whichever one is going to be easier for you, and go through that. But I think you really need to just do a very careful step-by-step troubleshooting to see where exactly the problem is coming from and kind of just go from there. My guess, and this is 100% of a guess, it is very likely that I'm wrong, but my guess is it's something to do with the modded D-terminal cable and the RGB HV signal that's being sent. But that's just my guess. You're going to want to determine that before you start messing with stuff. So do some more troubleshooting. Let us know how you make out. And also, congrats on owning an awesome monitor. Well, that's it for this time. The questions this week were only on Patreon, but anybody who supports on any of those monthly services are welcome to ask any question. It just so happens that the majority of the supporters are on Patreon, so often it just looks like I'm doing that one service. But Any support or anybody who supports anywhere, please just ask whatever question you have in the latest Q&A post, because the way these services work, I can't really figure out what's a new question on an old post. Plus, as you saw today, I like just scrolling through in real time and answering questions as if we were just hanging out, chilling somewhere together. But as always, thank you to everybody who supports in any way, because it really is you who's keeping all this stuff alive. And I'll see you next week.